Is President Donald Trump declaring war on the drug cartels? He's invoking the Alien Enemy Act. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Executive Director with Americans for Limited Government and Americans for Limited Government Foundation. Hit that subscribe button. Today, we're going to be talking about, first, some poll numbers. 56% of Americans, according to the latest Fox News poll, are approving of President Trump's handling of border and immigration. And I'm going to walk through some of these executive orders that the president has put into place and these proclamations. I think he's declaring war on the drug cartels. It sure is shaping up that way. He's sending troops to the border. He's declared a national border emergency. He's invoking the Alien Enemy Act. And there's a host of other authorities that he's putting into place as well, including calling up the Ready Reserve, which can go up to 1 million men as needed to secure the border. And there could be, eventually probably lethal force used against these drug cartels that the president has declared to be terrorist organizations, not unlike Al-Qaeda or Islamic State or Hamas or something like that. And certainly lethal force has been used in the war on terror against those extra national organizations. In this case, Trump is saying that Venezuela is actually sponsoring the Tren de Aragua and other drug cartels and narco terrorists that have been invading the country, pumping all this fentanyl into our country and killing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans. And so President Trump is just saying enough is enough. It's time to get tough. And with that, we're going to take a look at my piece here. Here it is. President Trump is not acting arbitrarily. He is executing the laws of the land. And again, 56% of Americans are approving of his handling of border and immigration. Is he declaring war on the drug cartels? First, let's look at this poll. 56% of Americans approve of Donald Trump's handling of border security and immigration, according to the latest Fox News poll conducted March 14 to March 17, as the poll handed Trump his highest approval rating ever for a Fox poll at 49%. And you can see it here. I have some crosstabs here, actually quite interesting. Let's see here. Inflation, border security. Here you go. Do you approve of the way Donald Trump is handling the following issues? Border security. 56% in total approve. We could zoom in a little bit. Hold on a second. There we go. That should be a little easier to read if you want to zoom in with me. 56% approve, 43% disapprove. And the approval includes almost majorities in almost every single demographic. 59% of men, 54% of women, 58% of whites, 45% of blacks, which is still very high. Trump didn't get 45% of the black vote. 51% of Hispanics. Moving on down on age. Under age 45, 54%, over age 45, 57%, under 30, 51, under 35, 53, and over 65, 53%. And then if you look at political lines, 51% of independents approve, 94% of Republicans, and 19% of Democrats. On that part, you would note that only 5% of Republicans disapprove of Trump's handling of border and immigration, but 19% of Democrats approve. So this is kind of bipartisan. It's cutting across party lines, and that's why Trump is getting a whopping 56% approval rating on immigration and the border. So what you have here is a popular mandate. He won the popular vote in 2024, the first Republican to do so in 20 years, since 2004. And so I think he believes he has political capital, particularly on the immigration issue, and he's going to utilize it to, I argue, take out these drug cartels that are killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. So the public mood measurement from Fox comes as President Trump and his administration seek to defend their aggressive approach to combating illegal immigration and deadly drug trafficking publicly and in federal courts. Now, on March 15, you will recall we've covered this. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg sought to curtail an injunction Trump's proclamation the same day invoking the 1798 Alien Enemy Act that the international criminal organization Tren de Aragua, supported by Venezuela, is, quote, a hybrid criminal state that is perpetrating an invasion of and predatory incursion into the United States, and which poses a substantial danger to the United States. And here's the invocation of the Alien Enemy Act. And that was on March 15th again. And here's Trump declaring these drug cartels to be terrorist organizations, which means they can be targeted with not just the laws of counterterrorism, but we bomb terrorists overseas. So I think drug cartels should probably watch out. President Trump probably wants to blow them up. That's what I'm saying here. The proclamation came the same day the U.S. removed around 250 such enemy aliens who were put onto planes and to El Salvador and removed to El Salvador, removed around 250 such enemy aliens who were put on planes to El Salvador and in whose jurisdiction they now reside. But I say he's not acting arbitrarily. He is executing the laws of the land. And here again, we had used this piece earlier. Ryan Goodman, good piece from justsecurity.org. If you want to get the timeline of the U.S. flight to El Salvador and judge's order to turn the planes around, that's what happened. But by the time the judge had issued his injunction, and this was just like a draft order, and I guess he was just like verbally telling them, to turn the planes around. By then, the plane's already halfway to El Salvador when this hearing's happening. And so basically the administration is like, no, they've already been removed. So that it's kind of a moot point. By the time, within hours, they were safely landed in El Salvador. They were in El Salvador's jurisdiction. So a lot of the parts of this order, because it talks about being under the jurisdiction of the United States and control. By that point, they were not in control, the United States, of these terrorist gang members. They were already had been transferred via an executive agreement, internationally between President Trump and the president of El Salvador. So that was kind of that. Those 250 individuals, they're gone now. But I still think that, again, this is not an arbitrary act. Trump is acting in accordance with the law. He's on January 20th by executive order. He's declared the drug cartels to be terrorist organizations. So I asked the question, and this is under 8 USC 1189 designation of foreign terrorist organizations. So the president can direct the secretaries to declare the Tren de Aragua to be a terrorist organization. So is Trump declaring war on the drug cartels? And the Enemy Alien Act provides in 50 USC section 21, restraint, regulation, and removal, that upon presidential proclamation of, quote, any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and the president makes public proclamation of the event, all native citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government being up the age of 14 years and upward, who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized, shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. So this is a law. This was passed by Congress. Again, it was in 1798. Tom Homan, that's a reporter asked him, that's a really old law. And Tom Homan's like, a really old law? Well, the U.S. Constitution's even older, and we still pay attention to that, underscoring the point that this is still the law of the land. And President Trump can issue the proclamation, which he did legally under the Alien Enemy Act. And we're going to look at some of the other provisions of the law. We haven't gotten into it yet. Trump also found that every member of Tren de Aragua was engaged in active hostilities against the United States and would not be eligible to gather up their belongings before departing the U.S. as provided under 50 U.S.C. Section 22. This quote here is from the proclamation. All such members of Tren de Aragua are, by virtue of their membership in that organization, chargeable with actual hostility against the United States and are therefore ineligible for the benefits of 50 U.S.C. 22. What's that about? Time allowed to settle the affairs and depart. So this is kind of like the ask nicely provision. But Trump is saying, no, they're engaged in hostilities against the United States. You're not allowed to gather up your belongings. Here's what that section states. When an alien who becomes liable as an enemy in the manner prescribed in Section 21 of this title is not chargeable with actual hostility or other crime against public safety, he shall be allowed for the recovery, disposal, and removal of his goods and effects, and for his departure, etc., the full time for which is or shall be stipulated by treaty and force. So in this case, Trump saying, you are enemy combatants. You do not qualify for 50 U.S.C. Section 22. Okay, so moving on. And while 50 U.S. Code Section 23 provides for federal courts to hold hearings on removals, those only appear to apply to, quote, residents of the United States. And I found this part to be interesting, that there actually is a provision for federal courts to conduct judicial review on the removals, but only applies to residents. Quote, after any such proclamation has been made, the several courts of the United States having criminal jurisdiction and the several justices and judges of the courts of the United States are authorized, and it shall be their duty upon complaint against alien enemy resident and at large within such jurisdiction or district to the danger of the peace and public safety, and contrary to the tenor or intent of such proclamation or other regulations which the president may have established, to cause such alien to be duly apprehended and conveyed before such court, judge, or justice. And after a full examination and hearing of such complaint and sufficient cause appearing, to order such alien to be removed out of the territory of the United States, or to give sureties for his good behavior, or to otherwise be restrained conformably to the proclamation or regulations established as aforesaid, and to imprison or otherwise secure such alien until the order which may be so shall be performed. Okay, so this section, again, applies to alien enemy residents. However, so under the emergency, Trump has declared that Venezuela-sponsored Tren de Aragua has invaded the U.S. Therefore, legal resident aliens of Venezuela or legal resident aliens who are members of the gang could be subjected to removal and then go to a court, federal court, for a removal hearing. Now, a lawful permanent resident, though, has a green card in accordance with U.S. immigration laws. For example, under 8 U.S. Code Section 1101. Here's that. The term lawfully admitted for permanent residence means the status of having been lawfully accorded the privilege of residing permanently in the United States as an immigrant in accordance with the immigration laws, such status not having changed. But Tren de Aragua, the alien enemies, in particular the March 15th flight, were all said to be illegal aliens and therefore are non-residents under U.S. law, just pure invaders. And so now I'm going to make an analogy here, because Trump is saying this is an invading force. This would be the same as an invading army crossing the U.S. border and occupying territory in the United States. Even if the invading army were here for 6 months or 3 years, they would not ever become, quote, residents under U.S. law, and upon capture would therefore not be subjected to removal as residents under the Alien Enemy Act. Instead, they would be treated as enemy combatants and subject to military law and perhaps military tribunals, if anything. Whereas the application of 50 U.S.C. Code Section 23 appears to be specifically for lawful residents who are potentially being deported, in which case due process under the Fifth Amendment and the law applies. Under law, aliens are non-citizens. A person can be an illegal alien or a resident alien. For purposes of the Alien Enemy Act, it can be further broken down that a person could either be an illegal enemy alien, an invader, or a resident enemy alien. Therefore, like you were living in the United States, you had resided here, you immigrated here, you're a resident, and then suddenly the U.S. goes to war with the country you came from. You're a resident alien. You could be deported too, but you would have a hearing. This distinction matters. One person was an invader while the other had traveled here legally, allowed to stay, and established legal residence. Either way, under Trump's proclamation, the regulations he issued call for immediate removal of all of the enemy aliens, and that they, quote, shall not be permitted residence. Quote, I direct that all alien enemies described in Section 1 of this proclamation are subject to immediate apprehension, detention, and removal, and further that they shall not be permitted residence in the United States. So I say any potential legal residents might still fall under Section 23, at least until their green cards are revoked, at which point they might be treated as the illegal enemy aliens, i.e. the invaders. So do they have a green card? Do they not have a green card? Therefore, is the Section 23 applied to them? Do they get a removal hearing in a federal district court? Or are they illegal invaders, and they're being caught like essentially on the battlefield if we're in a state of war? I think we might be, in which case that it might not apply, and then just put them on the planes, get them the heck out of here. Again, these distinctions matter. This is particularly important because Trump declared a national border emergency under the National Emergencies Act. And here's the National Emergencies Act. President Trump has invoked this. He's also declared a national energy emergency. But in 2019, he did a national emergency for the border as well. And then he was able to use it to reappropriate monies or repurpose monies for the purpose of building parts of the border wall. He's doing that again as well. But he's invoking laws that Congress has passed. And in his national emergency declaration, do I have that pulled up? I need to get that up. Therefore, I, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America, by the authority vested in me and the laws of the United States of America, including sections 201 and 301 of the National Emergencies Act, hereby declared that a national emergency exists at the southern border of the United States. And he said it requires the use of the military under 10 USC section 12302. So this is where he's calling up the ready reserve, subsection A, in time of national emergency declared by the president after January 1, 1953, or when otherwise authorized by law, an authority designated by the secretary concerned may, with or without the consent of the persons concerned, order any unit or any member not assigned to a unit organized to serve as a unit in the ready reserve under the jurisdiction of that secretary to active duty for not more than 24 consecutive months, and not more than 1 million members of the ready reserve may be on active duty without their consent under this section at any one time. So for the next 2 years, President Trump has the ready reserve at his disposal to act militarily against the drug cartels. Again, they've been declared to be terrorist organizations. He's declared the national emergency. So I think that is he going to, direct the forces against these? I think he might, because in his national emergency declaration, he states, and that section 12302 of Title 10 is invoked and made available according to its terms to the secretaries of the military departments concerned, subject to the direction of the Secretary of Defense, to provide additional authority to the Department of Defense to support the federal government's response to the emergency at the southern border. I hereby declare this emergency requires the use of the armed forces. Right here, President Trump is saying, I'm going to use the armed forces, quote, to go at these drug cartels, to secure the border, to finish the border wall, to do everything. So if there's a battle on the border, don't be surprised if there's military there shooting back. In fact, the military's already been deployed. And like in 2019, Trump is using the emergency to finish construction of the southern border wall under 50 USC 1631 and 10 U.S. Code section 2808. And 2808 is about the construction authority in the event of a declaration of war or national emergency. So Trump is going to utilize this once again. And in accordance with Section 301 of the National Emergencies Act, that the construction authority provided in Section 2808 of Title 10 United States Code is invoked and made available according to its terms to the Secretary of Defense and at the discretion of the Secretary of Defense to the secretaries of the military departments. So I say this is a military operation in part, and one that could undoubtedly escalate should the military start attacking the positions of the enemy drug cartels. So I'd say this is a zone of power that appears to be beyond the scope of the otherwise non-emergency application of civil and criminal law. What do I mean by that? Well, waging war is not done in courtrooms. It's not done via warrants. You don't get execute search warrants when you're about to attack enemy positions. I think is a very good example. So the Fourth Amendment would clearly not apply to if you're fighting a war on U.S. soil, even though it is on U.S. soil. You wouldn't go get a warrant to go attack an enemy position. You would just go attack it. And there's others, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's under the Fifth Amendment. But how could that possibly apply to a war where you're attacking enemy positions and going on offense? You're just gonna bomb the enemy positions, or you're gonna send the army, charge them. There are no trials there. There's no due process in a battle. So, for example, I note in the Civil War, then President Abraham Lincoln invoked the Insurrection Act on April 15, 1861. And we have that proclamation right here. We could zoom in a little bit. All right, here we go. Proclamation, whereas the laws of the United States have been for some time and now are opposed, and the execution thereof obstructed in the states of South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas by combinations too powerful to be suppressed by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings or by the powers vested in the marshals by law. Therefore, I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, in virtue of the power in me vested by the Constitution and the laws, have thought fit to call forth, and hereby do call forth, the militia of the several states of the Union to the aggregate number of 75,000 in order to suppress said combinations and to cause the laws to be duly executed. The details for this object will be immediately communicated to the state authorities through the War Department. So in this proclamation, this was the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln was invoking the Insurrection Act. And this was the legal basis under which he was waging the Civil War. So I think that's important to note here. We haven't gotten that far yet. Had Lincoln had to deal, though, with the district and circuit court judges of today, every time the Union was attacking the positions of the Confederates, there would have needed to be a hearing, undoubtedly raising all sorts of ridiculous questions. Are you sure they're an enemy? How can you tell? Was using their gray uniforms to identify targets, viewpoint discrimination under the First Amendment? Should the enemy have been killed without a trial? So yeah, if you're going to invoke the Bill of Rights and say that it applies to a war on U.S. soil, then you have to say, oh, wow, you can't target them because, you're only targeting them because they're wearing gray uniforms, and gray uniforms is a freedom of expression. You can't consider their viewpoint. You say you're targeting people who say they're Confederates. Well, that's viewpoint discrimination. That violates the First Amendment. You can't target people based on their viewpoints or their allegiance to the Confederacy. Or you could say that they shouldn't be. You can't wage a battle of Vicksburg, Gettysburg. What's going on here? We're going to put an emergency injunction against the Union Army from fighting against the Confederates at Gettysburg. I mean, that's where you kind of have to go in order to make sense of the Bill of Rights having some sort of application to a war. Clearly, while there are no wartime exceptions to the Bill of Rights, I think there's some zone of power in the executive when you're fighting a war that you would have to still do all the things that are necessary in a war, even if it's on U.S. soil. And it's a very delicate constitutional issue, but I think how could it be any other way? Could you imagine having to go to federal court and argue that no, targeting the enemy was not viewpoint discrimination, or that no, the enemy was, it was kill or be killed at the battle, and so no, there were no trials prior to killing the enemy combatants. How could it be any other way? After all, the Fifth Amendment provides no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. But in the Civil War, 620,000 men lost their lives in both the North and the South. And this estimate is from American Battlefield Trust, battlefields.org, Civil War casualties. And I see here, roughly 2% of the population, an estimated 620,000 men, lost their lives in the line of duty in both the North and the South. And So there was no due process. There was a bloody war in which more Americans have died than any other war. The Civil War, 620,000. That was more than we lost in World War II at 405,000, more than World War I, 116,000. And until the Vietnam War, in fact, the Civil War, we had lost more men in the Civil War than we had lost in all of the other wars combined. After Vietnam, then the numbers are roughly equal. But it just tells you just how deadly and how tragic and horrible that war was for the United States. Shouldn't have happened. All of this, though, the 620,000 men lost, was all under Lincoln's declaration that there was a rebellion. So you go back to his 1861, April 15, 1861, that proclamation, it led directly to the deaths of 620,000 men. For better or for worse. The Union won the war. Slavery was abolished. We have equal protection in the 14th Amendment, the Voting Rights Amendment in the 15th Amendment. We have civil rights now. The Union was saved, but at great cost. And, we're still a United States of America. Now, again, there may not be any explicit wartime exception to the Bill of Rights, but clearly there is a long-established executive exception to it in the case of military operations, even those conducted on U.S. soil. And so then we look at the Insurrection Act. It was enacted in 1792, and I got that version here. This was in 1792. This one got repealed, so it keeps on getting amended and replaced over the years. But initially, it was to deal with the Whiskey Rebellion. It was updated in 1795, and again in 1807 as the Insurrection Act, and again in 1861 and 1956. The president allows the president to restore order, whether the state's governor wants to do so or not. So this is the method by which the state militias, later on the state National Guards, are going to be federalized. Now, it was used by Lincoln to wage the Civil War and by Dwight Eisenhower in 1957 when Arkansas attempted to use the Arkansas National Guard to block Brown v. Board of Education from being applied. And so Eisenhower federalized the Guard to enforce it. In both Lincoln and Eisenhower's cases, neither intervention was requested by state governors. And it remains the law of the land today. So we look at the use of the militia and armed forces to enforce federal authority. This is still on the books. Whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion. So there you go. We haven't gotten to this point. Trump has not done this yet, but it's probably worth considering whether states and cities, counties might be harboring Tren de Aragua and other terrorist gangs. But three things have already occurred, key things. Trump has declared the national border emergency. He has proclaimed there is an invasion of the United States, and he has authorized the United States military to deal with it. Sound like a state of war? Are we therefore in a state of war against these drug cartels? Yes, it would seem that we are. President Trump is saying that Venezuela, via its proxy Tren de Aragua, is waging war against the United States, and he intends to stop it. Now, it's worth noting that several states and localities are still enforcing sanctuary policies for illegal immigrants, which will undoubtedly include members of the drug cartels and other gangs that Trump has declared to be terrorist organizations. Given the presence of sanctuary cities and states, is it, in the words of the Insurrection Act, quote, becoming, quote, impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings? I think it might be. I think that Judge Boasberg is showing that in the normal course of judicial proceedings, that waging a war against these terrorist organizations or rebellion or whatever, it could become impractical to deal with this in the normal course of criminal law and civil law. I think that it's possible. Are the cities and states who are sanctuary cities and states going to cooperate with federal authority? Trump is invoking the Insurrection Act. Not yet. He's invoked the Alien Enemy Act. He's invoked the National Emergencies Act. He said he's going to use the military to secure the border. He's declared these drug cartels to be terrorist organizations. Are the cities and states going to have sanctuary policies harboring these terrorists? It's a good question. They probably shouldn't do that. I think it could pose a very obvious problem, given the context that I just put this all in. So those cities and states should also be paying very close attention to the fact that Trump pointed to the sanctuary jurisdictions in his national emergency declaration in Section 17. So far, just to have federal funds cut off as an incentive to cooperate with federal authority. But he need not stop there. Guys, you paying attention? Sanctuary jurisdictions, quote, the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall, to the maximum extent possible under law, evaluate and undertake any lawful actions to ensure that so-called sanctuary jurisdictions which seek to interfere with the lawful exercise of federal law enforcement operations do not receive access to federal funds. Further, the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall evaluate and undertake any other lawful actions, criminal or civil, that they deem warranted based on any such jurisdictions' practices that interfere with the enforcement of federal law. So, could the Insurrection Act end up being used by Trump too if cities and states start siding with the terrorist gangs? As noted above, it wouldn't be the first time it was ever invoked. Arguably, the use in 1957 was for far less, to desegregate the schools. Undoubtedly, Eisenhower understood what that might mean, but providing a deterrent in the case of 1957 could have been cheaper and safer than allowing an escalation at the time. So if you go back to 1957, Arkansas was actually putting out the Arkansas Guard to prevent the desegregation of the schools. And so Eisenhower stepped in and says, are we going to get Civil War Part 2 here? Maybe I should step in. I'll declare that this is it could be a rebellion. I'm federalizing the Guard. And they snapped to attention. They followed Eisenhower's commands. They allowed the schools to be desegregated, and there was no Civil War II. And so actually by doing that, he could have actually headed off a much larger conflict if he allowed the state guards to start coming out and prevent Brown v. Board of Education from being applied. So maybe by a show of force, did he prevent a much larger tragic conflict in the United States? We'll never know the counterfactual. So could Trump prevent a much larger conflict by actually using the full weight of the law to tell the sanctuary cities and states, you're going to comply with federal authority here? So sometimes it's cheaper to, do a deterrent than to do defense. So cities and states might not want to find out either, since today it could also be a lot cheaper and safer to just cooperate with federal authorities and see to the removal of the terrorist gangs. Hey, how about that? You could just cooperate with immigration's customs enforcement when they come to round up terrorist gang members. Maybe that would be cheaper. Maybe that would be easier. Maybe that would be safer. Maybe harboring known terrorists is not a very wise decision by sanctuary cities and states. Maybe they should stop being sanctuary cities and states while there's still time. Not to be alarmist, but everyone should be paying heed to very specifically President Trump's very legal invocation of war powers, and be careful not to cross the threshold. Just like any U.S. citizen the past 2 decades would need to take care not to start aiding and abetting terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, Hamas, or Islamic State, since there are long-established, definite legal consequences for doing so. This could easily come to involve military actions with lethal force utilized against the terrorist gangs, given the authorities that Trump has already invoked. Just saying, this could come down to lethal force. Trump says he's going to use the military to secure the border, but also he's declared these drug cartels to be terrorist organizations. I bet you he starts bombing them. Do cities and states really want to get in between that? They probably don't. I think, and so should too Canada and Mexico be paying attention. Want to be a state sponsor of terrorism like Venezuela? Trump is expecting cooperation. So you'll see that Mexico has already sent like 10,000 troops to the border. I think Trump is getting more cooperation from the government of Mexico than he is the state of California. Just going to go there, or maybe even New York City. Maybe New York City is a little bit better than California. We'll see what happens with Mayor Adams over there. But I think that cooperating with federal authorities in Trump's endeavor here would be very wise. But Canada and Mexico, pay attention. Trump is not toying around here. He is invoking military war powers. Do not harbor these drug cartels who are moving fentanyl into this country. It's a very bad idea, in my opinion. And I could be wrong. I mean, it could be that Trump invoked all of these war powers, but he's actually just bluffing. He's not going to do anything. Do you want to find out? Does anyone want to find out if he's bluffing? I don't want to find out if he's bluffing. I think he's deadly serious. I think Trump has been campaigning on this since 2015. It's been 10 years now. I think it's like his mission in life. He's going to fix the illegal immigration problem. He's going to restore U.S. sovereignty. He's going to protect the border, and he's going to get rid of these drug cartels. He's going to crush the fentanyl trade. So if you're harboring these people, you've been warned. So in any event, under U.S. law, he has every means, President Trump, at his disposal to escalate the conflict against the terrorist gangs, or to trade war for that matter, if he decides it becomes necessary to target the enemy cartels abroad. So if the cartels are just operating across the border in Mexico and the Mexican military is not doing anything, maybe they should actually cooperate with the U.S. military, help track these people down, and kill them. Just attack their positions. Just start sending in F-14s. Just bomb them. Now, will it come to that? It might be better not to find out. The Mexican military could just go take care of it themselves, and crush the fentanyl trade, get rid of the drug cartels, and so forth. But they might not be capable of doing so. They might need some assistance. So I think that's what President Trump is offering. But I'm not privy to their conversations with the Mexican president and authorities. But I assume that we're offering assistance. We could be providing intelligence, saying here's where they are. Go get these guys. They've been moving fentanyl. But in all of the above, none of the actions that I've described here or taken, or that might be taken by President Trump to root out the terrorist invasion, are arbitrary per se. Instead, they are all being done in accordance with laws that Congress, we just went through all of the sections of the U.S. code that Trump has invoked. It's not arbitrary when you're executing the laws. That's the definition of limited government and the rule of law, by the way. Limited government and the rule of law. Basically, what that means is the public officials cannot act arbitrarily. They are bound and limited by laws. They can only act, the acts they can take are the ones that are prescribed by the laws that were by the duly elected legislature. Trump is invoking all of those. So Trump is not acting arbitrarily. He is acting in accordance with the laws. And we don't have an imperial presidency. We have an imperial judiciary that seeks to get in between the president's execution of the laws, including war powers. I mean, they're going to get overturned. There's no other way for it to be. We have separation of powers in this country, and you can't issue an injunction against the military battle. So instead, they're all being done in accordance with the laws that Congress has long since enacted and have been used throughout U.S. history in times of war and other national emergencies. For better or for worse, President Trump, with a popular mandate, we started talking about the Fox poll, 56% of Americans are approving Trump's handling of the border and immigration. Well, that included the declaration of a national emergency, sending federal troops to the border to secure the border, authorizing basically to use the military force to secure the border. If anyone starts shooting, they're going to get blown up. And then he's invoked the Alien Enemy Act. He's declared these drug cartels to be terrorist organizations. I think they're going to get blown up. I think that, are we at war? I think we might be. So again, Trump with a popular mandate from the American people to secure the border and to end the illegal immigration and drug trafficking appears to be saying he's going to wage war against these cartels. I'm Robert Romano, the executive director with Americans for Limited Government and Americans for Limited Government Foundation. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day. But first, let's go to the chat here. We'll see what's going on with you guys. Thanks for listening. Let's see. Got some folks in the chat here today. Let's see what you're up to. Let's see. KJ Avery, the IDF. Don't know what you mean. Betsy Burns, they didn't ask me. In fact, I have never been in a poll. I think the people in the border question would be everyone that voted for Trump, which is higher than the poll. Same with the illegals. No, not everyone's going to agree with Trump, but when you do a poll, when you conduct a poll, you're going to use a scientific sample distributed throughout the population. We can the Bureau of Labor Statistics will do the same thing when they'll conduct a survey to figure out what the unemployment rate is. You can get pretty accurate census readings by using scientific samples. So Fox and other pollsters, they'll use scientific samplings, but 56% say they approve of President Trump's handling of the immigration issue and the border. Let's see here. Bill LeQuire says, BS, this is all lies. I quoted every source. I read from all of the laws. I don't know what you're talking about. Woodrow Messmer. It would be higher by a lot of people in America are treasonous communist thieves like the Democrats. Okay. Elaine Honia says, definitely. Let's see here. Esther A. Acosta Sambolin. We learn everything. We learn every something. Thanks. Okay. Okay. He says, we learn something every day. Thank you. No, thank you, Esther. Thanks for listening. Kenneth Lefebvre. How is this limited government? Well, the definition, as I was just stating, of limited government is that you are bound by the laws. You cannot act arbitrarily. The acts of public officials, including the executive branch, have to be in accordance with laws. And I just cited all of the laws that Trump has invoked. He's not making up these actions. He didn't invent the Alien Enemy Act. If Trump were acting arbitrarily, or he was an imperial president, why doesn't he just arbitrarily cut taxes? Why is he waiting for Congress to act to cut taxes in the budget bill? Or why did he wait for Congress to pass a continuing resolution? Why didn't he just keep spending the money if there was going to be a government shutdown? Now, there was no government shutdown. But I think you understand the point that Trump is not acting arbitrarily. In fact, in several key areas, he's waiting for Congress to act. But in the areas where Congress has already acted in pursuant of the laws of the United States, then that is limited government. When you're executing the laws, when you're not executing the laws that Congress has passed, that wouldn't be limited government. That would be acting arbitrarily. Trump is not acting arbitrarily. He is acting in accordance with the laws. That's what limited government is. This is Robert Romano, Executive Director of Americans for Limited Government and Americans for Limited Government Foundation. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.